The Pittsburgh Penguins got some brutal injury news on Friday regarding Jake Guentzel. Pat and I are going to discuss that injury plus what it means for the team right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. You can also follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Beside me is Patrick Damp, my co-host for the show. You can follow him on Twitter at Synonym for Wet. Also, thank you so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. Pat, it's been 2 days since I last talked to everyone on the show. It's been 4 days since you last talked to everyone on the show. And in typical fashion, all hell has broken loose with this organization. Starting off today, we'll get to the Drew O'Connor and Mikael Granlund stuff and maybe what that means for Erik Karlsson a little later on, as well as Kyle Dubas self-promoting himself. But on Friday, it was announced by the Penguins that Jake Guentzel has undergone successful ankle surgery and he will be out for the next 12 weeks. That puts his timeline right around October 27th, right before Halloween, I believe. And if you read the release, it doesn't specify when he suffered this injury. Yeah, I'm seeing people say it was during the Beauty League, which he participates in. He's done that for the last couple of years. I've seen people say that it was during the season and that really no one knew about it. I think that one is more likely right now, at least in my opinion. I'm just fully speculating on that. But obviously, Pat, brutal blow to the Penguins to start the season. What was your immediate reaction when you saw it?
Genuine surprise. This kind of came out of nowhere. Like we said, it's an unexpected injury to a key contributor to this team, especially for one that still has cup contention in their heads. And the way I look at it is I'm not going to speculate on when it happened, whether it was the Beauty League or if it was something else. But if I had to speculate, I would say this is kind of similar to Crosby's wrist a couple years ago, where we didn't hear a lot about it. We didn't really know about it. And it was one of those things where they hoped that rehabilitation would help it. And then it just didn't get better. So they had to go the route of surgery. And here we are.
You make a good point there. And also, it's good to point out that the Penguins, and especially Mike Sullivan, they don't like disclosing injuries, especially during the season. They'll always do upper body injury, lower body injury. Heck, you don't even know when a player is hurt sometimes for the Penguins. Heck, sometimes someone will miss practice. And it's like, oh, you didn't even know he was hurt. They just don't talk about them. So I guess I'm not really surprised in that context. But Guentzel will probably miss at least the first month of the season with this injury. And when you look at that, that's your first line left winger gone. And you're going to have to start figuring out who is going to replace him for the first few weeks of the season. And also, I will tell you this, he's only going to be reevaluated in 12 weeks. We don't even know if he's going to be back by the end of October or into early November. Pat, maybe he's still out by Thanksgiving. Maybe it's into December. That sometimes you never know with these kind of surgeries. And the Penguins, they're going to have to really rack up as many wins as they can without him because, I mean, you're taking out 40 goal scorer to start the season. Someone's going to have to do his job in replacing him, even though it's going to be easier said than done.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say they didn't even say out 12 weeks. They said reevaluated in 12 weeks. So for all we know, this could end up as a longer term injury. And then you find yourself having a real issue because this team's up against the cap. And like you said, we're going to talk about the Drew O'Connor, Erik Karlsson buyout window thing coming up here soon. But this is a real pickle right now because as much as I do like Riley Smith, I don't know if he's a first-line guy. He strikes me more as a middle six guy, second, third line. So I don't think he can eat the minutes just fine. But the production, you're losing a big chunk of production to start the season. So we're either going to have to see some offense by committee here or somebody's really going to have to step up coming out of camp.
And that's the big thing. I mean, the first person who honestly came to mind for me to try and start up in the top six, I don't care if I'm going to get a little bit of heat for this. do you try Drew O'Connor with Sidney Crosby and Rickard Rakell? I mean, I understand that's been flown around, just him in the top 6, even when everyone in the top 6 is healthy. I've disagreed with that, but now he may seem like one of your best options to at least try up there for a few games, see if he can produce. Again, I understand he only had 5 goals and 11 points this past season, but he's young enough. He has offensive upside. Why not try him up there for a few games, see if he can produce alongside Sid and Rakell? Maybe Brian Russ is next to Sid or something like that. We all know how good Sid is at, I guess, elevating players above their skill level. I mean, let's just put it that way. And I think that could really help O'Connor in that case, and also give the Penguins more offense when Jake is out.
Well, here's the blessing in disguise, is that this happened in the offseason. This didn't happen in December. So you've got all of camp to figure this out. You can do some plug-in and some play-in here. It doesn't have to be an immediate answer that you have to get figured out in the middle of the season. So Sullivan and the coaching staff, as well as the first line, are going to have some time here throughout camp in the preseason next month to figure out, okay, who are we going to put with Crosby on the first line? So if that's a little bit sunshine on a rainy day, fair enough. But I do think the only positive we can really glean from this is that we'll have time. And who knows? Every year there's somebody that comes out of camp that we weren't talking about right now that we're talking about come October. Could it be DOC? Could it be Alex Nylander? Who could it be that steps up and is a temporary first-line winger for a month or two to begin the season?
I mean, I've also seen people throw out Valtteri Pustin, but I think he also has to make the team first. I'm not really sure if he's going to make it even with Guentzel out. You have Vinny Hinostroza, who they just signed a few weeks ago, Andreas Janssen. You got the other depth players they signed, Matt Nieto, Noah Chari, Lars Eller, but I don't think they're going to put Lars Eller at first line left wing. I think that's a little ridiculous in my opinion. But there's also an option, Pat, where could they sign someone, maybe like a Tomas Tatar or something like that? But then you also have the problem, sure, you can LTIR Guentzel, right? But you're still going to have to find room for him once he becomes healthy. And say you do sign someone like a Tatar, and that would make sense. You can just plug him on the left wing on the first line with Crosby and Rakell or whoever. That'd be awesome. But then you have to figure out who you're going to ship out when Guentzel comes back. And especially if an Erik Karlsson trade happens this weekend, got to figure that out too. Just saying, it's an option. I don't know how likely it is, but it's definitely an option that they could sign someone to replace Jake for a little bit of time this upcoming season.
The question Kyle Dubas is going to have to ask himself in regards to this is, well, it's a twofold question. One, do I think I have somebody in-house that can replace temporarily the production of Jake Guentzel? And also, is there somebody out there I'm willing to take a chance on that I'm also willing to lose for nothing? Because once you get that person, whether it be via trade or via signing, you're going to have to lose someone for nothing at some point, because somebody's probably going to get tried. They're going to try to bury someone in the minors, and they're going to have to pass through waivers. And chances are a team will take that person. So you lose an asset for next to nothing. So essentially, those are the two questions Kyle Dubas has to ask himself heading into this season, now that he knows he's going to be without Jake Guentzel for a minimum of 12 weeks.
And one more thing before we wrap up, this also affects his contract negotiation, I think. I mean, heading into the season, last year on his current deal makes $6 million per for this deal. You've seen talks about him asking for over $8 million, maybe upwards of $9 million, and I think he's worth that. Now he's going to miss a chunk of time. Is that going to send his asking price down a little bit, you think?
Probably not, just because you never want to go down in a negotiation until you absolutely have to. But yeah, after our last episode together, I think I'm done. I'm done predicting contracts, because I think I proved I suck at it.
We're going to dive into that right after this break coming up, but I'm just going to tell everyone right now, I am him when it comes to that contract projection with Drew O'Connor. That's all I'm going to say. Pat he's done with predicting contracts, but that's coming up right after this break. But yeah, really tough news on Jake. Hope he can get back healthy, because I mean, I was probably going to predict him to score 50 again this upcoming season. He didn't do it this past season after I predicted 50, Pat, but hey, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I was prepared to do it. How about that? But that wraps up this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, we got to dive into that Drew O'Connor contract, what it means, especially for the second buyout window. And yes, we're going to squeeze a little bit more Erik Karlsson talk in there because Erik Karlsson content remains unlimited until a trade happens. But before we dive into that, we have to discuss FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll win $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to get the first home run in the game. And it's all an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. So there's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. One more time, FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball and Locked On. All right, we're back here in this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am Hunter Hodes. That is Patrick Damp. As I said, coming into this segment, Pat, I'm him, as the kids like to say, those old teenage kids that throw these new sayings out there. Drew O'Connor re-signs with the Penguins on Wednesday, avoids arbitration. I gave some quick thoughts during my intro for that episode before I got into it with John Chick of Locked On New York Rangers. 2 years, $925,000 per year. Really like that deal. They get it done before arbitration, which was supposed to be on Friday. I saw some people asking, oh, well, does this mean they're not going to get the buyout window? No. That does not mean that. They get the buyout window no matter what. It starts this Saturday and it ends on Monday. And Pat, I'm going to get your thoughts on it right now. I think that's very fair value for a player who, again, has offensive upside, is good defensively. You can plug him on the penalty kill. And as I said in the first segment, he's going to be an option to replace Jake Guentzel on the top line, at least for a few games. He's young enough. I think he's good enough. See what he has. But overall, I like this contract, gets a fair raise, and I think he could be aligned for a pretty decent season this upcoming year, especially as a middle six winger, maybe a little bit of a bottom six winger, I should say.
Yeah, this is a nice little piece of business for Kyle Dubas and the Penguins because you got a player that now has a contract that is extremely low risk and extremely high reward because I do think, the metrics show that he's a middle six forward and he's got potential to be better. So you have him for under $1 million per. You got him for a couple of years. He's going to get a chance to play to play higher up in the lineup due to injuries. And you put a guy like that in your lineup, and he shows up the way he has with the potential that he's shown over the past couple of years. And it's a good bet to take. And this has kind of always been Kyle Dubas's MO since he took over in Toronto, and now that he's in Pittsburgh. He finds those guys that have higher upside but aren't getting the chances elsewhere, gives them a chance there, lets them go get paid somewhere else, and then finds the next guy. So could this be another chapter of that where Kyle Dubas locks up a guy for 2 years, he comes in, produces well above his market rate, and then he says, hey, appreciate it, go get paid, go secure the bag, but it ain't going to be here.
I mean, he'll obviously have to score a bit more for that to happen, maybe like 15, 17, upwards of 20 goals. He hasn't shown an ability to do that yet, but hey, he's got to be given the chance to do it. That's the main thing. And I also think this was somewhat strategic for Kyle Dubas and company. You do this on a Wednesday, August 2nd, right before the arbitration date, and that sets up a pretty big weekend, I think, coming up for the Penguins, Pat. Saturday, the second buyout window opens. Everyone's speculating about Mikael Granlund. We can just get into that now as well. He's the most likely candidate to be bought out, even though Kyle Dubas has gone on the record to say that he doesn't like buyouts. But here's the thing. Forget the salary cap space for a second, and they will get upwards of $4 million if they were to buy out Granlund. I don't think Granlund fits any part of the Penguins heading into the season, even with Guentzel hurt. He's not a very good forechecker. He's not even close to the finisher that he once was. And his defensive game is also not very good anymore. The only thing that he can really do at this point in his career is pass. And I'm sorry, the Penguins have enough of those kind of players in the bottom six. They don't have many pure finishers down there. And yes, they also have some defensive specialists down there too. But Granlund is also not that. So in my opinion, no matter what happens with the Karlsson situation, and we'll get into that in a second as well, I don't think the Penguins have a choice with this Granlund situation. They have to get him off this team in some way, shape, or form this weekend during the buyout window.
They do. They absolutely do. And I think you're kind of spot on about he doesn't really do anything significantly well except for pass. And while that's great, that's not a $5 million a year skill.
Right.
And I do think that he does have that value as a passer and a playmaker, but again, not at that cap hit. I also love to quote Elliot Friedman of Sportsnet, or it was either him or Jeff Merrick, but it's one of my all-time favorite quotes when it comes to roster management in the NHL. When other GMs know that you're drowning, they do not send you a life preserver. They throw you a boat anchor. Everybody knows Mikael Granlund's contract is an absolute albatross. So they're not going to just take it. You're going to have to throw something else in, or you're going to have to retain. And you know they're not going to retain on this because it's not an asset people are trying to get. So it's not like Erik Karlsson where you're trying to get him on your team, but you need them to retain because he's a talented player with a big contract. This is a contract they want to shed. So buying him out come tomorrow, because we're recording this Friday afternoon, is imperative. So that to me,
anytime during the 48 hours, to be honest.
Yeah. But why waste the time? It's not like you have to do any big math or any big contractual decisions. Just say, hey, Mikael, thanks for everything. Sorry I couldn't work out. Best of luck elsewhere. Hope someone signs you.
And I don't think the Penguins would want to part with futures to get out of that contract. I know teams have done that in the past. Heck, the Islanders just did it with Josh Bailey, trading him to the Chicago Blackhawks right around the free agent time. And they had to trade a pretty high pick to get out of that contract just because Josh Bailey is not that good anymore. I know, former Penguin killer, of course, but just not.
And there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with parting with draft picks to get rid of bad contracts. But right now, where the Penguins are as a franchise, that's just not the right thing to do. And where Kyle Dubas is taking this team over and where he wants to take this team as POHO and GM, that is not part of the strategy.
Right. I agree. And I think it's at this point when they obviously have all of their picks available to them, but they want to use those picks to acquire players who can come help right now, not to ship them out just to get out of a player that, you know, the former GM got. I just don't think that's in Dubas's wheelhouse right now. And the final thing for this segment, Pat, we saw this. Elliot Friedman said this on Financial Network last night. For those that did not hear it, basically said that he's going to watch this weekend to see if anything happens on the Erik Karlsson front. And we've been kind of circling this weekend for a while, even before Friedman said that, to be honest. I mean, they were going to try to take this O'Connor situation to as close as it could be to the arbitration window. I mean, heck, if you wanted to get really close, you could have just signed up today before the hearing, but they just wanted to do it on Wednesday. I'll say this, and maybe I look stupid, maybe I don't. I think this is the last big weekend to get Erik Karlsson. If this weekend comes and goes, and especially into Monday, and a trade is not finalized, I'll say it here, Pat, I don't think he's going to become a member of the Penguins for the rest of the offseason heading into training camp. I may sound stupid for saying that. Don't get me wrong. You could definitely see a deal maybe happening right before camp, but I'll go on a whim right now and say this is the last best chance for it to work. And if it doesn't happen this weekend, I think they might be out of luck.
I appreciate you being willing to step out there and have the take, but I do also recall what our pal from Locked On Sharks told you, where the Brent Burns deal took right up to camp.
Right.
Them. So, granted, different management.
I may get old takes exposed here. Don't get me wrong.
But here's the thing. I don't disagree with you. I do think this is the last best chance. But I also think it'll really show us what the status of the deal is. I think there is a little bit of a game of chicken here. I think Greer and the Sharks have overplayed their hand. I think they don't have – there aren't enough teams interested, nor is there enough cap space in the league right now for teams to take on Erik Karlsson. And now they have Erik Karlsson in a Swedish newspaper straight up saying, I am not going to play for the San Jose Sharks next season.
Right.
So they lost all of their leverage. And no disrespect to Elliot Friedman. He's the best of the best of the best. But let's not pretend like he had to follow any big breadcrumbs to figure this out for this coming weekend. Like, the buyout window is open for the Penguins. They can get up to $4 million in cap space should they buy out Mikael Granlund now that they've signed DOC. It's everything short of a flashing red light saying, Karlsson watch, Karlsson watch, Karlsson watch. Now, granted, maybe he's talked to a couple people who said the Penguins and Sharks are talking and this could happen, especially because the Hurricane and Kraken have made moves that tell us maybe they're out on this. So all in all, I think this is a big weekend for it. I don't know if it's going to be the end-all be-all, but I think we're going to learn a lot come Sunday or Monday.
I think so too. I mean, we'll see at the end of the day. You know, it's been the same information, I feel like, for the last 3 to 4 weeks. I'm tired of talking about it. I think you are probably tired of talking about it. Let's just see a trade happen, and then we can talk about it then. Because then at that point, he'll be a member of the Penguins, and then we can really dive into so many topics relating to that. But just the same old song and dance. Let's just get something on the road here, people. Come on. But
listen, I love talking mobile offensive defensemen, but this has just been taking forever.
Dragging on and on and on. But hey, again, maybe it happens this weekend. Stay glued to your phones. Everyone that listens/watches, we'll see what happens this upcoming weekend. That wraps up the second segment. Coming up to end the show, Kyle Dubas self-promoted himself on Thursday. Pat and I are going to discuss that right after this. All right. We're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am Hunter Hodes. That is my co-host, Patrick Damp. So, Pat, on Thursday, Kyle Dubas had the perfect Barack Obama meme, putting the medal around himself and just basically promoting himself to general manager. He had been the interim GM for the first 2 months on the job, as well as president of hockey operations. And then it was announced on Thursday that he is assuming the full-time role as GM. I was watching the clip from Elliot Friedman on NHL Network on Thursday night, and he kind of made it known that it sounded like they were trying to go after Brandon Pridham, and then Pridham decided he was going to stay in Toronto. I'm not surprised by that, considering how close Pridham and Dubas were. But I'm not surprised by this move. I mean, he's been the one calling the shots, and he is going to continue to call the shots for this team. I still wish they hired someone as a first-time GM so that they could learn on the job, be groomed on the job, so that this person could eventually make the hockey decisions, and then maybe Dubas is just advising the person in that next phase, similar to what Colorado does. But I understand why Dubas did what he did at this point, just because, I mean, you look at this last month, I mean, how many teams are going to let GM candidates interview at this point? It's probably not that high, right? So I'm not surprised in the slightest, and he's going to continue to call the shots for this team.
Yeah, and I do think, I don't think he wants to set up the same situation he was in Toronto, because as much as we think we have clarity on that, I don't think we ever really will. He doesn't want to have a situation like he had with Brendan Shanahan. I almost said Kyle Shanahan. It's almost football season. But basically, I also think that he really wants to put his stamp on this Penguins team in the first year. And I imagine there probably weren't many candidates that he could have, gotten to come in as GM, because the wheels are in motion here. The draft has happened. Free agency is open. Buyouts are happening. Training camps are going to open very soon. So I think at this point he was like, you know what? Screw it for one season at least. I'm general manager and president. We'll see how this season goes. We'll see how the workload pans out, and then we'll reassess. Plus, and we're going to get into it here in a sec, he put a pretty nice little team around him. So it's not like he's a one-man show dictator here. It's a pretty big team so far.
I agree. And I do want him to add more assistant GMs to this front office. I think my dream is to have a front office like it was under Rutherford, where you had people like Billy Guerin, Jason Bottrell, Jason Carmano. It's just a dream team of a GM, at least when Rutherford knew what he was doing at the time.
Well, I was going to say,
really good competent assistants, but go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, let's not make it like that where they all have to coexist together in order to be good, because as soon as a couple of them splintered away. Ooh. Oh, we saw some bad moves.
That's true. That's a very good point. But man, when they all were together, they were making some dang on good moves. But he's now the new GM, president of hockey operations, but he's been that way for the last couple of months. A couple other moves as well, Pat. Andy Saucier is the director of professional personnel now, Really nice to see him rise the ranks in the organization throughout 3 different management groups now. He was there under Jim Rutherford. He was there under Ron Hextall, and now he's there under Kyle Dubas, was the video coach, but he's transferred those duties over to someone else. And he was great at that, and now he continues to stay in the organization. I'm really happy for him with his new role. Eric Heasley, director of minor league and amateur scouting operations, and then Amanda Kessel and Trevor Daley, both special assistants to Kyle Dubas. Really love those 2 moves. I think they're probably going to be assistant general managers at some point in their careers. Trevor Daley has been in the organization for the past few years, was there under Rutherford and under Ron Hextall. I'm really happy for him, and especially for Amanda Kessel. I really like these moves overall.
Yeah, it gets back to what we talked about last time when we kind of had our discussion over this with Amanda Kessel. He's building a front office that has a bunch of different experiences within hockey. It's not just the same 15 to 20 guys who cycle in and out from every organization in each conference. I mean, you have Trevor Daley, who is a Stanley Cup champion with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So you got that little bit of home cook in there, a guy who played for the Penguins in their glory days. So
also knows Kyle Dubas for a long time.
Yeah. You also have Amanda Kessel, who now has experience with the organization. Her brother won 2 Stanley Cups with the Penguins. She has won Olympic gold and silver. She has won world championships. She's heavily involved with the PHWPA. These are people, and then you look at guys like Heasley, guys like Saucier. They aren't traditional everyday hockey people. They're not just NHL people. They're people who have views and experiences from around the sport, which is really important when you're an organization that needs to get creative. And where this organization is right now in regards to everything, their core aging, them not having a great prospect pipeline, the fact that the dark days in a rebuild are not that far off, they are going to have to get creative. So having a guy like Kyle Dubas running the ship in a diverse group of opinions under him puts them in a better position to have a soft landing.
Exactly. And I saw this take after the announcement was made on Thursday, where people were like, why are Amanda Kessel and Trevor Daley getting these jobs? It's like, how are you expected to get experience in a hockey operations role after your playing career? Like, I don't understand why so many people just got mad for the sake of being mad. Like, do you want a bunch of hockey men running your team? No, like, you want new people involved in hockey ops to get that experience. Amanda Kessel, she just had the program. Trevor Daley's been with the organization for a few years. They know what they're doing. And this is just an entry-level job to probably get a better job, whether it's with the Penguins or whether it's with a different team.
And we went from Ray Shero to Jim Rutherford to Ron Hextall and Brian Burke. No disrespect to any of them. They all have, except for maybe Hextall, again, no offense, they all have great resumes. And that includes Brian Burke. You may not like his opinions. You may not like his takes on the sport or on Sportsnet, but the guy has championships. He has a ton of experience. Jim Rutherford is in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Ray Shero is his father is one of the founding hockey people ever. And they're all great. They've all done great things, but we have done hockey man, hockey man, hockey man, hockey man. Now we have a new approach. And I don't want to sound like annoyed Yinzer here, but we haven't been out of the first round since 2019. So are you going to try the same people and then just get the same results? Because that's what's happened. And I know a bunch of people are, punching their steering wheel or throwing their earbuds out or punching the screen right now. But, well, the Leafs only got out of the first round because of under Kyle Dubas. That organization is cursed. That franchise is cursed. I don't know what ancient burial ground in Canada they built the Scotiabank Arena on top of, but they're taking a new approach. They have to take a new approach because they have not had success since 2018 when they got knocked out by the Capitals in the second round.
Right. And I agree. I mean, there's nothing wrong with these moves. Again, we can argue for days about them maybe not having enough assistant GMs. I would like them to have another assistant GM or two.
Absolutely.
In there. Heck, I mean, I also wouldn't be surprised, and I'll put this out there for you right now just to end the show. Would you be surprised if Kyle Dubas hired someone to be the full-time GM next year and just give that up? I wouldn't. I mean, what if someone becomes available that you can't pass up on and you're like, okay, I'm going to hire this person to be a first-time GM, let him learn on the job, and then boom, he can make the decisions. I think part of him becoming the full-time GM was because no one was out there to take the job right now.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that point. I don't think anybody was left, and I don't think anybody was going to get permission at this point in the offseason. Now that the draft and free agency are behind, teams are already putting their plans for the season in motion. And you know, as much as Fenway Sports Group has truckloads of cash they can offer people, we're to the point now where teams have to say, yeah, you can talk to so-and-so. And by this point of the offseason, they're going to go, no, you cannot talk to them. So next year when contracts run out and, you know, there's going to be 6 or 7 teams that have cup aspirations for this year that don't win it. And we see every offseason teams that are very much contenders don't win it and overreact. So who knows come next June, there might be some big names available that Kyle Dubas can go, come on home. Come on. I need a GM. I
mean, you're right. You know, who's to say a top team doesn't flame out in the first round again? I mean, there's going to be teams that obviously flame out in the first round, but who's to say another big upset doesn't happen in the form of maybe not as big as the Bruins, but close enough where a different team loses and then they clean house. They fire their coaching staff or someone in the front office where Kyle's like, okay, I'm going to hire you to be the first time GM. So that
you know who I'm looking at for that to happen to? Carolina, because everybody has been penciling them in as they're going to be the Stanley Cup champions. They're going to be the Stanley Cup champions. They're going to be the Stanley Cup champions. And it's been going on for 5-6 years now, and they haven't done it. So at some point, Carolina's ownership is going to get impatient, and they're probably going to roll some heads.
You're not wrong there. I mean, it's time for them. I mean, they got to stay healthy. I mean, the Svechnikov injury was really brutal this past season, but they got to stay healthy, and they got to get the goaltending. And I think they also need another top scorer too for their. Yeah, that's, you know, you can tune into Locked On Hurricanes to hear with that. But I believe that will end this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Really appreciate all of you listening to / watching this episode of the show. Please note, if something big happens this weekend, whether it's a buyout or especially an Erik Karlsson trade, Pat and I will be here right after it happens. We'll have an emergency episode for you all, so stay tuned for that if anything does happen. But again, thank you all so much for listening to / watching this episode of the show. If nothing else happens, we'll be back with another episode on Monday.